All right. So now what we're interested in looking at is the cost of food relative to the urban-rural divide. Now, the cost of food, while we have it here just as the total or the average amount a household spends on food, is somewhat informative. You can see it does vary if you sort it. These places all have zeros because the population is too small and it was just excluded. But you see that it does vary. So the most expensive would be Bella Cara. It's not a huge surprise, really, really rich people. If you sort by income, you see they're also the wealthiest. So you see this kind of parallels this, but it's not perfect. So you notice that even though West Vancouver wasn't second in income, they are the second on food. And further, especially once you get down the line, it's not going to necessarily be as closely intertwined, right? So the amount of money that a household spends on food isn't necessarily as informative as the proportion of their total income that household spends on food. So rather than just looking at the total cost of food, we're going to create another variable and we're going to normalize it. So what we're going to do is add a new variable, and we'll just call this income on food. So we want to make sure that this one is a double. Again, that allows for a decimal point, right? So income on food is going to be the percentage, means we need a decimal, of income that a household spends on food. So save this. We'll calculate this field, and then we can move on from there. So just right click, calculate field. And so here, what we want to do is we want to do food as the numerator, so food divided by, and then we go with income as the denominator. Now this would give us just the ratio, and that would be strictly decimal point, but we want it as a percentage. So let's multiply it by 100. Now I want to highlight a point, right? So I've got this one row selected. I click apply. Again, only that one got selected, right? So this highlights, remember to clear your selections before you do anything like this. You clear the selection, you click apply, the whole thing fills in. You get an error message about dividing by zeros, and that's because, again, some of these values are zero. So they give us a null. But we're not worried about those. We're only worried about the ones we have data for. So you'll notice now we've got a new variable, percentage of income spent on food, the highest being this one, Dee's Lake, which is definitely not the highest income. And so zoom to Dee's Lake, you see that this is in a rural community. Now, 1 point does not extrapolate to a broader trend. That would be called anecdotal evidence, although I would say look at where this place is, and that would give some explanation to the pattern. So anyway, again, clear this selection, and now we can move on to actually visualizing the results. So I have the symbology here classified by urban and rural. That will be useful in just a second. You want yours classified by your revised classification method. Anyway, we're going to create two types of charts to explore a little bit about it. So if you go to create chart, remember we created a scatter plot last time. Those are great for showing the relationship between two variables. We're going to use a bar chart to show a little bit about our data. You can close this because we don't need it. Bar charts are great for showing counts of things that start at 0. So the way the bar chart works is we'll go with whatever category we want. We'll say this one. and we'll choose the aggregation method, right? So count. If you have some numeric field that you want us to display, you can add to that. So this is just to count the total number of urban or of rural and urban areas. And you notice if you hover over it, it'll tell you what the value is. But we want to know what the total population is. So we go to select and you click population, click apply. Notice it automatically changes it to sum. It's kind of smart enough to know that we want to do this, right? So we can see that even though the total number of rural areas is way higher, the population is way skewed towards the urban. So now we'll create another type of chart. If you right click here and we go to box plot, which should be right here. These are great for comparing the spread of one variable across multiple categories. So again, another way to do a bit of relationship between one variable and another. So we'll click box plot. Now for this one, the numeric field that we want to look at is going to be income on food. We'll click apply. Now, currently, we are not splitting it up by anything. We're just showing the full range across the data set. And so you see that it varies between, I think if you highlight over it, it shows you the full thing. So it says the minimum, the maximum. It gives you the first and third quartile, which is the 25th and 75th percent place, the median, which would be the 50%. The IQR is just the difference between the first and the third. Anyway, not to belabor that point. You can split it up by category if you want. In this case, I'm going to go with urban versus rural. Now, one thing I want to point out here. First, you'll notice that the spread is much greater among the urban and the rural versus the urban. Also, the rural area spends a bit more. So it's subject to extreme variability despite and spending more on money. There are a lot more data points that are going into this one. Right, we had a much larger number here. If we go to count, right, 600 plus versus 64, but the population way different. Anyway, back to the bar chart or to the box plot. So we can see that. The other thing I want to point out is that if you classify by the same variables that are on your map, notice how neatly ARC matches the color schemes. It's a pretty nice tool, pretty neat functionality. So if you change this category, something else, right, it's not going to do that. Name, there's a whole bunch of individual points, so it's not important. But anyway, if you get rid of it, it just shows it as one. Or alternatively, if you classify this as rural and urban, but then you change the symbology of your layer to be something else, say you want to look at the patterns in population, it gets rid of this nice color scheme. So that is one thing to note. If you got a color scheme that you like on this chart and then you change this here, it will change it. And just because you go back to unique values doesn't mean it's going to preserve your color scheme. So if you go to urban versus rural, notice that it changed the color. I liked that green and blue. I don't find this one quite as appealing. And as you'll learn in the lecture videos, color choice is really important. So that's something we'll need to be cognizant of here.